It is a small thing. You could hold it in one hand. A few dried twigs split along the grain and bent, folded, pinched into a shape that resembles an animal. 4 legs, a body, something that was running once or standing still. It sits in the National Park Service Archaeology Collection at Grand Canyon, one of hundreds documented from the canyon's cave systems over the past century, and it is roughly 3,000 years old. Archaeologists call these split twig figurines. The technique is deliberate. A single twig or a small bundle split partway down its length and then folded and wound into a compact 3-dimensional form. The examples in the Grand Canyon collection show deer, bighorn sheep, and other animals with cloven hooves. Archaeodactyls, in the technical vocabulary of the people who have studied them. The craftsmanship is not primitive. It takes specific knowledge to split the twig at exactly the right point and bend it without breaking, and the surviving examples show that the people who made them had done it before. What no one can tell you is why they were placed where they were found. The Grand Canyon is not simply a scenic corridor. It is a vertical landscape that drops more than a mile from rim to river, cut through layer after layer of rock that records nearly 2 billion years of geological history. People have lived and traveled here for thousands of years, and the oldest secure evidence of human presence in the canyon is older than the figurines by a significant margin. But the figurines belong to a specific period, what archaeologists call the Archaic, a broad designation for the hunter-gatherers of the American Southwest who preceded the agricultural communities that came later. The National Park Service documents split twig figurines as archaic artifacts in the canyon. They appear in the park's public interpretation materials as small figures made in animal shapes, left in canyon caves. Hundreds of archaeodactyl-shaped examples have been documented from canyon cave contexts since the first reported finds in 1933. This is not a single hidden cache. It is a documented practice spread across the canyon's cave landscape, reaching back thousands of years. What makes the figurines worth examining carefully is not that they exist. It is where they were placed. The people of the Archaic were not sedentary. They moved through a landscape that demanded exact knowledge of water sources, game migration, plant cycles, and weather, and they did not build the permanent structures that the communities after them would. What they left behind is mostly durable material: stone tools, fire-cracked rock. Organic material survives only where conditions are extreme, and the canyon's deep inner gorge holds pockets of extraordinary aridity. In the right cave, at the right elevation, away from the traffic of the canyon floor, a twig bent into an animal shape can last 3 millennia. The figurines do not belong to a single layer of that time. The National Park Service describes archaic people as active in the canyon from roughly 3,000 to 9,000 years ago, and the available radiocarbon evidence clusters the figurines in the later part of that range, the period archaeologists sometimes call the Late Archaic, roughly the last 3,000 or 4,000 years before the Common Era. Split twig figurine complexes appear in that period, not only in the Grand Canyon, but in the Green River drainage and portions of the Colorado Plateau. The Grand Canyon complex is the most completely documented, but it is part of a pattern spread across a wide territory. In 1995, a team of researchers published a formal study in KIVA, the Journal of Southwestern Anthropology and History, reporting 5 previously unreported cave sites in the Grand Canyon. These were high cliff sites, not easy to reach from the main canyon trails, not places where people seem to have lived for any extended period. The researchers found no hearths, no middens, no accumulation of food waste, no evidence of the ordinary residue that living spaces leave behind. What they did find was cultural material, figurines, and other archaic artifacts that appeared to have been deliberately placed alongside fossil bone material from long extinct animals. The sites had been used for cultural purposes. The radiocarbon dates placed that use between roughly 4,400 and 3,700 years ago. And then, apparently, they had not been lived in. The absence of ordinary living signs in the same context as carefully placed objects is itself a kind of evidence, not proof of anything specific, but a question that becomes harder to explain away. You do not bring a small split twig animal figure to a difficult cliff cave and set it beside a cairn and the bones of ancient animals because you happen to be passing through. The context resists the simplest explanations. In 1955, a team of archaeologists undertook what they called the Grand Canyon Figurine Project. Douglas Schwartz, Arthur Lange, and Raymond de Saussure backpacked their food, water, and equipment into cliff-face sites that were not convenient to reach. Everything they needed went up the cliff on their backs, and the context itself could not come back down. Only samples, notes, and measurements. They recorded what they found. Figurines placed in contexts that included rock cairns and sparse associated artifacts, without the signs of extended habitation. They submitted samples for radiocarbon dating. This was still early in the history of the technique, and the results they reported were historical, uncalibrated laboratory measurements. 2 figurine samples returned dates of 3,530 plus or minus 300 years, and 3,100 plus or minus 110 years. They published those results in 1958. Those numbers, read carefully, are not a single date for the whole complex. They are 2 measurements from 2 specimens, using the conventions of 1950s laboratory work. Subsequent research has refined the broader picture. But the numbers from 1958 did something important. They placed a real chronological anchor on the practice. These were not recent objects. They were not from the historic period or from any living generation's memory. They were made and placed by people who belonged to a world that had ended before the first European reached the American Southwest. Consider what kind of place these objects were carried into. Dry, sealed, high on a cliff face, well off any route a person would take to hunt, camp, or travel. Reaching one of these caves took a decision first, and then it took effort. That was true for 3 men with mid-century field equipment. It was true 3,000 years earlier for whoever climbed up carrying a bent twig. What the 1995 study and the 1958 fieldwork together argue, carefully, as good archaeology does, is that the Grand Canyon figurine complex reflects something more than accidental deposition. The leading interpretation, developed and refined across several decades of Southwest archaeology, is that the figurines were connected to a hunting-related ritual. The specific argument involves 2 regional styles, a Grand Canyon style and a Green River style, which show different construction techniques. A 2004 study in American Antiquity examined the Grand Canyon style in the context of broader late archaic material from the Southwest and argued, using ethnographic analogy to the archaeological record, that these figures functioned as what the researchers called increased totems, objects connected to the abundance or renewal of game. The fossil cave correlation adds another layer. Some of the figurine cave sites appear to be located in caves that also contain artiodactyl fossil deposits, the bones of ancient members of the same animal families the figurines represent. NPS-affiliated researchers have reported this correlation and identified a hunting ritual as the most likely association. The proposal is that the fossil-rich caves mattered to the choice of location, that the presence of ancient animal remains in the stone walls of a cave made it the right kind of place. All of this is an argument from pattern. The researchers who developed it were working from material evidence, placement, style, context, fossil correlation, and from analogy with the ethnographic record of other hunter-gatherer cultures in the broader region. That is how archaeology works when there is no written record and no direct account from the makers has survived. The argument is reasoned, and it is the strongest honest interpretation available. But a pattern argues in general terms. It cannot tell you what was meant on a specific afternoon by a specific person carrying a specific twig up a specific cliff. And the 1995 study said as much about its own sites. The 1958 report is explicit on this point. Schwartz, Lange, and de Saussure wrote that they had not learned the cultural affiliations of the figurine complex. That sentence is worth staying with for a moment. These researchers had reached the cliff face caves on foot, recorded the contexts, submitted samples for dating, and produced the first formal radiocarbon chronology for the objects. They had the evidence in front of them, and they were the people best positioned in the world to say who had made it. What they published instead was the limit. The evidence did not tell them who made the figures, and they declined to fill that space with a plausible guess. That is not reluctance. It is not institutional caution or deliberate evasion. It is the record's honest boundary. No named people, no named ceremony, no chain connecting the material practice to any living community's direct knowledge. The figurines moved from the cave to the collection without their explanation. The explanation was not lost through carelessness or neglect. It was not the kind of thing that leaves a material trace. It existed in the people who knew the practice, in what was said when the twig was bent and the figure was carried up the cliff. And when that generation ended, that part ended too. If you find this investigation worth following, subscribing to the channel and leaving a like helps us keep this kind of work visible. It is the kind of history that rarely makes the main feed. Now take the word that runs through how the figurines are usually described. Hidden. The figure was hidden in a cave. The caves are hidden deep in the canyon. Something is being concealed. That framing is understandable. The caves are remote. They require effort to reach. Today, any presence in a Grand Canyon National Park cave, for any purpose, requires a valid permit from the park superintendent, explicitly authorizing use of that specific cave. The 2026 Superintendent's Compendium makes this clear, and it supersedes all previous releases. The stated reason is protection of non-renewable resources, prehistoric artifacts, fossil bones, fragile formations, and wildlife habitat. The caves are closed because they contain things that cannot be replaced once disturbed. That is a real, documented reason. It applies to all the park's caves, not only the caves where figurines were found. It is not a figurine-specific rule, and it is not the continuation of any ancient practice. But the word hidden carries an implication that the context does not support. Hidden implies that the purpose was to prevent someone from finding the objects, to keep them from an audience, to guard a secret from future discovery. The record does not show this. What the record shows is a pattern of deliberate placement in specific kinds of locations: remote, high cliff, non-domestic cave contexts associated in some cases with fossil material. The choice was made for reasons. Those reasons are not fully recoverable, but the logic of concealment from people who did not yet exist is not in the evidence. A practice does not hide its objects from the future. It places them where the practice requires. The inaccessibility of the caves was, in all probability, part of what made them the right kind of place. Not inaccessible to keep others out. Inaccessible in the way that places set apart from ordinary use are inaccessible, the kind of distance that marks a location as different from everyday space. And that choice had a second consequence, thousands of years downstream from anyone who could have intended it. Dry, sealed, high, and rarely entered is exactly the condition in which a bent twig does not rot, does not get eaten, does not get crushed underfoot, or washed out by a flood. In almost any other setting in North America, this object would have been gone within a generation or two. There would be nothing to date, nothing to catalog, nothing to argue about. Whatever the practice was, it selected the one kind of place that would outlast it. The caves did not hide the figurines from us. The caves kept them. What the record leaves us with is this: a documented pattern of intentional placement in unusual cave contexts, a leading interpretation that links the practice to hunting ritual or increased totemism. 2 regional figurine styles with distinct construction techniques, a fossil cave correlation that may have shaped site selection, and a chronology built from radiocarbon dating that places the practice in the late Archaic period. No named makers, no named ceremony. The strongest available explanation survives the evidence, but cannot be stated as more than an inference. And different figurines in different caves may have served more than one purpose across different groups and generations. Nothing in the record rules that out either. The world those makers belonged to ended long before the first European reached the southwest. It did not leave the canyon empty behind it. The Grand Canyon has tribes traditionally associated with it today, and they are consulted on how cultural resources inside the park are managed. What the archaeological record will not do is hand these particular figurines to any one of them, and no one living here now is under any obligation to supply the answer the record lost. The figurines are in the National Park Service Archaeology Collection. That is the whole surviving chain of custody. They went from the cliff face caves to the hands of the 1955 fieldwork team to the collection where they are catalogued today. They are accessible to researchers. They are no longer where they were placed. The